Eleanor Whitmore tore the letter open before her hands stopped shaking. The ink was unmistakable. She had memorized that handwriting 5 years ago, pressed it to her chest, wept over it in the dark. Nathaniel Ashford was alive. He was coming home. And in 23 days, she was supposed to stand before God and marry another man. She didn't scream. She didn't weep. She folded the letter, slid it into her dress, and walked back into the parlor where her aunt was arranging flowers for the engagement celebration. If you've ever loved someone the world took from you, stay until the end. Subscribe to our channel and tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story has traveled. The summer of 1815 had been merciless to Virginia. 3 weeks of heat without rain. Fields gone pale at the edges. The Whitmore land, 200 acres of river bottom, and tobacco rows her father had built from nothing, sat heavy under a white sky that promised nothing. Eleanor had been awake since before dawn. Not because of the heat, not because of the birds, because today was the day her Aunt Margaret had circled on the parlor calendar in red ink and called the beginning of Eleanor's real life. Eleanor had not slept in 4 days. She sat at her window with her father's old Bible open across her lap, not reading it, only holding it. The way a person holds something when they have run out of things to say to God and have decided that silence is its own kind of prayer. She was 24 years old. In 3 weeks, she would become Mrs. William Carter. Everyone in Charlottesville said she was fortunate. A Carter marriage meant security. It meant the Whitmore land would not be sold at auction, the way half the county's farms had been sold since the war touched the trade routes. It meant Eleanor's younger cousins would eat. It meant the name her father had spent his whole life building would survive into another generation. Her aunt had explained this carefully, patiently, more than once. Eleanor understood every word of it. She simply had not found a way to make her heart understand. The letter arrived with the Morning Post tucked between a dry goods invoice and a letter from the county clerk about property taxes. Eleanor nearly missed it. The handwriting on the outside was different from what she remembered, steadier somehow, like a man who had spent years learning to hold a pen without trembling. But the seal. The small, pressed mark in the wax. She knew that seal. She had last seen it 5 years ago on the final letter she ever received from Nathaniel Ashford. Her hands did not shake when she broke it open. That was the strange part. She had imagined this moment so many times, had rehearsed her own grief until grief became something she could carry quietly, the way a woman carries a stone in her shoe, and learns to walk normally, because stopping is no longer an option. She read the letter standing in the front hallway alone, with the sound of her aunt's voice drifting from the kitchen and the smell of cornbread rising through the house. Eleanor, I am writing this from Richmond. I arrived 2 nights ago. I know what I must sound like to you, a ghost who has waited too long to haunt the living. I do not ask for your forgiveness in this letter. I only ask that you not throw it away before you reach the last line. I did not stop writing to you. I need you to know that before anything else. Whatever you were told, whatever silence you interpreted as abandonment, I wrote to you every week for 2 years. I never stopped, not once. I am coming home, Eleanor. Not to cause you pain, not to demand anything of you. I am coming home because something was done to us that neither of us deserved, and I cannot spend another year of my life pretending I do not know what it was. If you have moved on, if you are happy, I will not disturb that. I give you my word. But I am asking you to hear me, just once, before whatever is coming comes. N.A. Eleanor read it twice. Then she folded it, pressed it flat against the inside of her dress, directly over her ribs, and walked back into the parlor. Her aunt was standing at the center table arranging a vase of white roses, the kind of roses her aunt had always liked, controlled, odorless from a distance, perfect to look at, and nothing more. You look pale, her aunt said without turning around. It's the heat, Eleanor said. Drink more water. You cannot afford to look ill at the Carter dinner on Friday. Her aunt turned assessed Eleanor with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had spent 30 years managing other people's appearances. Have you decided on the blue dress or the green? The blue, Eleanor said. Her aunt nodded satisfied and turned back to her roses. Eleanor stood in the doorway for a moment longer than necessary. Then she went upstairs to find what remained of Nathaniel Ashford's letters. She had kept them in a hatbox on the high shelf of her wardrobe, not because she was sentimental, or not only because of that, but because her father had given her the hatbox the year before he died, and she had never been able to use it for anything as ordinary as a hat. There were 9 letters in the box. She had received the first when she was 18, a month after Nathaniel's family lost the Ashford estate, and Nathaniel himself had sailed for Europe with the intention of rebuilding what his father's debts had destroyed. The letter was careful and formal, and underneath the careful formality was a person who was terrified and trying very hard not to show it. I do not know when I will return. I only know that I am coming back. This is not a goodbye. I need you to understand that. Whatever anyone tells you, this is not a goodbye. She had written back within the week, and the week after, and every week following for 8 months. Then the responses stopped. She had continued writing for another 4 months. Longer than pride should have allowed. Longer than her aunt thought was dignified. Then nothing. She had built her grief around a story she believed was true. Nathaniel had found his footing in Europe, had rebuilt himself, and in rebuilding had realized that what he'd left behind in Virginia was not worth the weight of a return voyage. She did not blame him for it. She had tried very hard not to blame him, but she had stopped believing the promise he made, and she had eventually slowly, the way ice thaws not all at once, but in the quiet daily inches, stopped waiting. Now she sat on the edge of her bed with 9 letters and a new one tucked against her ribs, and tried to understand what I wrote to you every week for 2 years meant when she had only ever received 9. Nathaniel Ashford arrived in Charlottesville on a Thursday. Eleanor knew because half the county seemed to know before noon, and the other half knew before supper. That was the nature of a town this size in the summer heat. There was very little to talk about, and a man who had been gone for 5 years returning without warning was the kind of event that traveled faster than weather. She heard it first from the kitchen girl, who had heard it from the blacksmith's son, who had apparently been at the livery when Nathaniel rode in on a dark horse with no luggage to speak of, and the look of a man who had not come home to visit. They say he's changed, the kitchen girl told Cook, not knowing Eleanor was standing just outside the doorway. They say he's got a hard look about him now. 5 years in Europe will do that, Cook said, practical as always. They say he asked after the Whitmore place first thing. Silence. Then Cook said, "Girl, you've got biscuits burning." Eleanor went back upstairs. She sat at her writing desk and looked at the blank paper in front of her for a long time. She picked up her pen, set it down, picked it up again. She was still sitting there an hour later when she heard the sound of hooves on the front drive. She did not go downstairs immediately. She listened to her aunt's voice rise with surprise, then shift into the particular tone Margaret Whitmore used when she was managing a situation she had not anticipated. It was a tone Eleanor knew well. Careful, warm on the surface, something else underneath. Then she heard his voice. 5 years was long enough to change a great many things. It was not apparently long enough to change the way a voice could reach through walls and floors and the careful architecture of everything Eleanor had built since the letters stopped. She stood up. She smoothed her dress. She walked downstairs. He was standing in the front parlor. Margaret stood across from him with her hands folded and her expression arranged into something polite and unreadable. On the small table between them sat 2 untouched cups of tea that nobody had offered, and nobody had asked for the kind of tea that appeared in this house when her aunt needed something in her hands to manage. Nathaniel Ashford was taller than Eleanor remembered. Or maybe he simply stood differently, like a man who had stopped apologizing for the space he occupied. His coat was travel-worn, and his hat was already in his hands, turning slowly in his fingers, the way it used to when he was choosing his words with particular care. He turned when she entered, and for a moment, Just a moment, the careful steadiness in his face came undone. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Ashford." Her voice was even. She was proud of that. "I'm sorry to come without more notice. I wrote ahead, but I wasn't certain the letter would arrive before I did." "It arrived this morning," Eleanor said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite relief. Something more careful than that. Her aunt stepped slightly forward, not between them, but close enough that the intention was clear. "Mr. Ashford was just explaining that he has business in the county," Margaret said. "He wished to pay his respects to the family." "Is that right?" Eleanor said. She was not asking her aunt. Nathaniel met her eyes. "No," he said. "That's not right." Silence dropped over the room like a cloth over a birdcage. Margaret's hands tightened on each other. "Nathaniel," Eleanor said. And it was the first time she'd used his given name in 5 years, and the word felt strange in her mouth, like a language she'd once been fluent in and had spent too long not speaking. "My aunt says you have business here." "I said it wasn't that." "Then say what it is." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Margaret, then back at Eleanor. "I came back because I never understood why you stopped writing," he said, "and I spent 5 years trying to accept that I might never know. But then 3 months ago I received something, from a man I'd dealt with in Richmond, a man who used to work postal routes in this county." Margaret made a small sound, not quite a word, not quite nothing. "He had a package." Nathaniel continued, his voice still level, but with a quality underneath it that Eleanor recognized, the particular stillness of a man working very hard to remain calm. "Letters. 31 of them, give or take, addressed to you, in my handwriting, never delivered." The clock on the mantel ticked. Eleanor said, "What? 31 letters, Eleanor. That's roughly a year and a half of weeks. More than that, really, because in the first months I was writing twice a week." He paused. "They were redirected, before they ever left Richmond. Someone had arranged for them to be held." Eleanor turned to look at her aunt. Margaret's face was very still. "Aunt Margaret," Eleanor said. "Eleanor. Did you know about this?" The silence that followed was its own kind of answer. Margaret Whitmore had a particular gift for justification. Eleanor had known this her entire life. Her aunt had a way of taking even the most indefensible action and surrounding it with so much practical reasoning that by the time she finished speaking, you were left feeling vaguely confused about why you'd been upset in the first place. She deployed this gift now. "You were 19 years old," her aunt began. "His family had just lost everything." "That is not what I asked you," Eleanor said. Her voice was quiet. That was the frightening part, even to herself. How quiet it was. "I asked if you knew about the letters." Margaret lifted her chin. "I knew they would only make things harder for you. The man was gone, Eleanor. He had sailed to Europe with nothing. What were you supposed to do? Wait indefinitely for a man who might never come back, who might rebuild his life entirely somewhere else and simply—" 31 letters, Eleanor said. "Forget you existed. I was protecting you. You were deciding for me. Someone had to." Her aunt's voice sharpened for just a moment, the practiced warmth dropping away to reveal something underneath it that was harder and more honest. "You would have waited. You would have wasted years you didn't have. The Whitmore land was already struggling. Your father was gone. You had no brothers, no husband, nothing but a promise from a man who had no money and no prospects and an ocean between you." "He had 31 letters," Eleanor said again. That was something. The room was very quiet. Nathaniel had not moved from his position near the window. He was watching Eleanor with an expression she couldn't quite read, or perhaps could read too well, and was not ready to name. "I need to know something," Eleanor said. She turned to him. "The letters you sent, were they only about the land, about coming back?" "No," he said. "They were not only about that." "What were they about?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You, mostly. What I was doing, what I was hoping. What I was afraid of, which was considerable. A pause. What I thought about when I couldn't sleep. Eleanor looked at him. Then she looked at her aunt. Then she said very calmly, "I would like you to leave the room, please." Margaret blinked. "Eleanor, please." Her aunt left. Not quickly, but she left. Yeah, the silence after the door closed had a different quality. Eleanor crossed to the window on the far side of the room and stood with her back to Nathaniel for a moment, looking out at the front drive at the pale summer sky above the tree line. "I need to ask you something," she said without turning around. "And I need you to answer me honestly, not carefully." "All right. In those 5 years in Europe, wherever you were, did you ever consider not coming back? Not because of the letters, not because of anything that was done to us. Just did you ever consider that perhaps it was easier not to?" A long pause. "Yes," he said. She turned around. "Twice," he said. "Once in the second year when it seemed like you had simply stopped, and I thought maybe you'd made your peace, and I should do the same. And once about 8 months ago, when I first heard about your engagement." "How did you hear?" "Someone wrote to a mutual acquaintance. It traveled eventually." He looked at her steadily. "That was when I understood I wasn't going to be able to simply accept it and move on. I'm sorry if that causes you difficulties. I'm not here to create them. But I could not stay away without at least—" He stopped. "Without at least making sure you knew the truth." Eleanor pressed her hand flat against the letter through the fabric of her dress. "I am engaged to William Carter," she said. "I know. He's a good man. I've been told so. He has done nothing wrong in this situation. I know that too. So you understand," she said, "that whatever you've come here to tell me, I can't simply—" "I'm not asking you to do anything," Nathaniel said. "I'm asking you to know the truth. What you do with it is yours to decide. It has always been yours to decide. That's the part I'm not sure anyone in your life has ever been particularly clear about." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell me about the letters." He told her, not all of it. Not in that one afternoon in that parlor with her aunt somewhere in the upper part of the house and the Carter engagement dinner 3 days away. But enough. He had written constantly through the first year. Weekly, sometimes more. The letters were everything he didn't know how to say out loud, his progress or lack of it. His homesickness, which he'd been embarrassed by for longer than he should have been. His plans, which kept shifting. His fears, which didn't. He had received her first 9 responses and had held on to them so carefully that they were worn soft at the folds. He still had them. He'd carried them across the Atlantic and back. Then the responses stopped. He wrote for another 6 months after that. Changed the routing twice, thinking maybe the problem was logistical. Wrote through the winter. Wrote through the spring. Nothing came back. He had eventually concluded reluctantly with the particular grief of a man who wants very much not to reach the conclusion he is reaching that Eleanor had decided. That the silence was its own kind of message. That she had looked at the length of the wait and the uncertainty of the outcome and made a practical choice. He had tried to respect that choice even while it was destroying him. Then the postal clerk found him. "His name is Jonas Reed," Nathaniel said. "He worked the Richmond mail routes for 8 years. He was dismissed last autumn, some dispute with his supervisor. And apparently when a man is dismissed with grievances, he sometimes decides that certain arrangements he was paid to maintain are no longer worth maintaining." "Someone paid him," Eleanor said, "to intercept your letters. To hold them in Richmond. Let my letters to you accumulate. Let your letters to me be delivered normally until they stopped on their own, which they eventually did." He paused. "The idea being that you would conclude I had stopped writing. And I would conclude you had stopped responding. And the silence would do what direct interference couldn't." "Who paid him?" Nathaniel's jaw tightened slightly. "I have a name. I'm still gathering proof." "Tell me the name." He looked at her. "Nathaniel." "Thomas Carter," he said. "Senior." The clock ticked. "William's father," Eleanor said. "Yes." She sat very still. "He had been in contact with your aunt," Nathaniel continued. "I don't know if Margaret understood the full extent of what she was agreeing to. I want to be fair about that, but she knew enough. She had agreed to encourage the silence from her side. Carter's man handled the logistics." "And the land," Eleanor said. Nathaniel looked at her. "You mentioned a name," she said. "The postal clerk. You said you received something from him. But I think this is about more than letters." A pause. Then carefully, "Your Riverland, Eleanor. The eastern 40 acres your father purchased in 1808. Carter has been buying property along that river corridor for 6 years. Your land is the only tract he doesn't own. Without it, he can't complete the access route he's been building for his freight operation. So he needed William to marry me. He needed the land. William was the method." Eleanor stood up. She walked to the window again, but not for the same reason as before. This time, she stood there because she needed something solid at her back and solid beneath her feet, and something to look at that wasn't the face of a man who had just explained in quiet and careful language that her entire life for the past 5 years had been managed by someone else's financial calculation. "Does William know?" she said. "I don't know," Nathaniel said. "I genuinely don't know. He has been kind to me. He has never given me any reason to believe he was anything other than what he appeared to be." "I believe you." "So either he doesn't know," Eleanor said, "or he is a considerably better actor than I have given him credit for." "Yes." She turned back around. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Not what you said when my aunt was in the room. Not the careful version. What do you actually want?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. "I want you to know the truth," he said. "That's the honest answer, and it's not the complete one, and you asked me not to be careful, so I'll give you the rest of it." He looked at her steadily. "I want to be allowed to try, to start over, or to continue. I'm not sure which it would be. I'm not asking you to break an engagement and trust me immediately. I know that's not something anyone can reasonably ask, but I am asking you when you make whatever choice is coming to make it with the full truth in front of you, not the version someone else chose for you." Eleanor looked at him. "You are not making this easy," she said. "No, ma'am," he said. "I don't reckon I am." Something about the simple honesty of it, the lack of performance, the absence of the smooth confidence she might have expected from a man making this kind of appeal, hit her in a place she hadn't expected. "I have an engagement dinner on Friday," she said. "William Carter will be there. His father will be there. My aunt will be there. And I will be expected to sit at that table and smile and behave like a woman who has chosen her future and is grateful for it." "I know. And you're asking me to sit at that table knowing what I know now." "I'm not asking you to do anything in particular," he said, "except not to throw away the letter I sent." She looked at him for a long moment. "I already folded it," she said, "and put it against my ribs." He said nothing, but something in his face, something quiet and careful and not quite hidden, shifted in a way that made Eleanor look away. "Go back to wherever you're staying," she said. "Let me think." "All right." "And Nathaniel." He stopped at the door. "The 31 letters," she said. "Do you still have them?" "Yes." "I'd like to read them, when I'm ready." He nodded once, put his hat on, walked out. Eleanor stood in the empty parlor for a long time after the sound of hooves faded down the drive. Then she went upstairs, sat down at her writing desk, and opened the hatbox. 9 letters. She had built her entire grief on 9 letters and a silence she had never once questioned. She pressed her hand flat on the top of the stack. Outside, the summer heat pressed down on the Whitmore land. Her father's land, her land. And somewhere on the Carter estate 3 miles east, a man named Thomas Carter was going about his evening with no particular awareness that the arrangement he had spent 5 years carefully constructing had that afternoon developed a significant crack. Eleanor looked at the blank paper on her desk. She did not pick up her pen. Not yet. But for the first time in 5 years, she was thinking about what she might write. Eleanor did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark with her hands folded over her chest and stared at the ceiling, and thought about 31 letters sitting in a postal clerk's drawer for 5 years, while she sat in this same house convincing herself she had been forgotten. At some point past midnight she got up, took the 9 letters from the hatbox, and read all of them again. Not searching for anything in particular, just reading them the way you read something when you need to understand how badly you misread it the first time. By the time the first light came through the window, she had made one decision. She was going to find out exactly what had been done to her. All of it. Every piece. Before she made a single other choice about her life. She dressed without calling for help. Came downstairs quietly. Her aunt's door was still closed. She went to the study. Her father's desk had been largely untouched since his death 3 years ago. Margaret had reorganized the surface that was her aunt's nature to organize things to arrange them into a shape she could manage, but the drawers had remained as her father left them. Eleanor had never had reason to look closely. She had reason now. She pulled the bottom left drawer open and found what she expected. Property records correspondence with the county assessor. A folded survey map of the Eastern River acreage that her father had commissioned in 1808 and been quietly proud of for the rest of his life. She pulled the survey map out and spread it flat on the desk. The eastern 40 acres ran along the Rivanna's South Fork for nearly a mile. She had known this her entire life, in the abstract way you know things about your own home, without ever examining them closely. Her father had mentioned the riverland occasionally, its value, its particular qualities. But he had spoken of it the way a man speaks of something he intends to pass on, rather than use something he is holding in trust for a future he believes in. She traced the boundary line with her finger. Then she opened the second drawer and found the correspondence. There were 3 letters from Thomas Carter dated across the last 4 years. The first was formal and pleasant, an inquiry about the land. A generous offer, the kind of letter a businessman writes when he expects to be refused, but wants the refusal on record. The second was less pleasant. The third was dated 14 months ago, and was underneath its careful language something very close to a threat. The ongoing uncertainty around the Whitmore property's east boundary is becoming a concern for several parties with interests in the river corridor. I trust we can find a resolution that serves everyone's needs before the matter becomes complicated. Eleanor read that sentence twice. Then she folded all 3 letters and put them in her dress pocket. She was still standing at the desk when she heard her aunt's footstep on the stair. Margaret came into the study already dressed, already composed, which meant she had not slept either and had spent the sleepless hours deciding exactly what she intended to say. "Eleanor," she began, "how much did he pay you?" Her aunt stopped. It wasn't like that. Thomas Carter." Eleanor kept her voice level. She had found in the last 12 hours that keeping her voice level was the only way to keep her hands from shaking. "He paid someone to hold Nathaniel's letters. He wrote to Father 3 times about purchasing the riverland, and somehow you knew about the letters and said nothing." She looked at her aunt directly. "How much did he pay you?" "Nothing." Margaret's voice was sharper than she intended. "Not a cent. I want you to understand that. I did not do this for money." "Then what?" "He came to me 2 years after Nathaniel left." Her aunt moved to the chair near the window and sat not comfortably, but with the particular stiff posture of a person preparing to deliver something they have rehearsed. "He told me Nathaniel had settled in France, that he had established himself there, that there was a woman." Eleanor went very still. "He said Nathaniel had formed an attachment in Paris, that he had no intention of returning." Margaret met her eyes. "He had letters, Eleanor. Correspondence. He showed me." "Forged," Eleanor said. "I didn't know that then." "Did you question it? Did you make any effort at all to—" "You were 21 years old, and you were still writing to a man who I believed had moved on." Her aunt's voice broke slightly on the last word. Not in grief, in something more complicated than grief. "I believed I was protecting you from years of waiting for someone who was never coming back. And perhaps I was also relieved. That there was a reason. That I could tell myself it wasn't cruel what I agreed to. It was practical. You agreed, Eleanor said. To what specifically? Silence. Aunt Margaret, to what specifically did you agree? To discourage you from writing further, Margaret said. To support the notion that it was time to move forward. Carter suggested that William would be a good match. He put it very reasonably. An excellent family financial stability. A young man of good character. Did you know about the postal arrangement, the letters being held in Richmond? The pause was its own answer. You knew, Eleanor said. I knew they weren't being delivered, her aunt said very quietly. I told myself it was kinder. That if you kept receiving his letters, you would never stop. Eleanor pressed her hand flat on the desk. I need you to stop explaining it like it was kindness, because what it actually was a decision made by you and Thomas Carter about my life, my land, my future, without asking me a single question. Margaret looked at her hands. The Riverland, Eleanor said. That's what this was about. That's what it has always been about. Carter wanted the land. Yes, I knew that. And William? Her aunt looked up. Does William know? Eleanor asked. Any of it? No, Margaret said, and her voice carried enough quiet conviction that Eleanor believed her at least about this. William knows nothing. He genuinely cares for you, Eleanor. Whatever his father arranged, William himself. His father arranged my engagement, Eleanor said. That is what you are telling me. My engagement to William Carter was arranged by his father and agreed to by you for the purpose of securing a 40-acre parcel of riverland. The silence that followed had a particular quality, like the moment after something breaks that cannot be put back together. She rode to town that morning without telling her aunt where she was going. She took the gray mare her father had left her, which was the only horse on the property that was entirely hers, and she rode the 3 miles to Charlottesville at a pace that suggested urgency without requiring explanation. Nathaniel was staying at the county inn, which she had expected. She had not expected him to be standing outside it when she arrived, which meant someone had seen her ride out, and word had traveled ahead of her, which was exactly the nature of this town, and exactly why she didn't have much time. My aunt confirmed it, she said before she'd fully dismounted. He stepped forward and took the horse's reins without being asked, holding them while she swung down. A small gesture. The kind of gesture a person makes when they've spent years thinking about what they would do if they ever found themselves standing next to someone again. What did she confirm? He asked. All of it. Carter brought her forged letters, told her you'd settled in Paris with someone else. She agreed to stop my letters from reaching you and to allow your letters to be held. Eleanor looked at him. She thought she was protecting me. She may even believe that now. And Carter, he wrote to my father 3 times about the Riverland. I found the letters in Father's desk. Father refused him every time, but Father is gone, and apparently Carter decided that the most efficient solution was to arrange a marriage. She paused. Nathaniel, I need the postal clerk, Jonas Reed. I need to talk to him directly. Eleanor, I need documentation, not just your word and my aunt's word. If I am going to do anything with this information, I need something I can put in front of people. He looked at her for a long moment. Reed is in Richmond, he said. He was willing to tell me what he knew. Whether he'll be willing to say it to anyone else is another question. The man took Carter's money for 6 years. He has his own exposure here. Everyone has exposure, Eleanor said. That doesn't always stop people from doing the right thing when the cost of staying quiet becomes higher than the cost of speaking. What are you planning to do? I don't know yet, she said honestly. But I know I am not sitting at Thomas Carter's dinner table on Friday and letting him look at me like I am a parcel of land he has already paid for. Something in Nathaniel's expression shifted. Something that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same space. I'm going to need a few days, he said. Reed can be reached. There's also a man here in Charlottesville, the Carter family's former land agent. He left Carter's employ last spring, under circumstances nobody has been particularly clear about. I've been meaning to find him. His name, Elias Boone. Used to work out of the county assessor's office before Carter hired him. Eleanor filed that name away. "There's one more thing," she said. "William. What about him? He deserves to know." She said it before she'd fully decided she believed it, but once she said it, she found she did believe it. "Whatever his father arranged, he has been honest with me, as far as he knows. He is in this situation as much as I am." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he said. "That doesn't make it easier." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." She took the reins back from him. 3 days, she said. "I need 3 days before that dinner. Find Reed, find Boone, get me something in writing. And if I can't get it in 3 days," she looked at him, "then I'll sit at that dinner table," she said, "and I will spend the entire meal watching Thomas Carter's face and deciding what I know from what I can see." She rode back before anyone could follow. The Carter estate was 3 miles east of the Whitmore property, which was not a coincidence Eleanor could fully appreciate until now. William Carter came to call that afternoon. He came alone without his father, which Eleanor thought was probably significant, and he sat in the parlor with his hat in his lap, and his posture carrying the particular stiffness of a man who has heard something he is not certain how to address. "I heard Ashford is back," he said. He said it simply without accusation. That was William's nature, direct, without aggression. Eleanor had always found it one of his more appealing qualities. She found it somewhat harder to appreciate now. "He arrived Thursday," she said. "Did he come here?" "Yes." William nodded slowly. "Eleanor." He stopped, started again. "I am not a jealous man by nature. I hope I have never given you cause to think otherwise, but I'd be less than honest if I said his arrival didn't concern me." "It concerns me as well," Eleanor said, which was honest and also told him almost nothing. He looked at her steadily. "Is there something I should know?" She looked at him, at his honest, uncomplicated face, at the good faith evident in every line of his expression, and felt the particular difficulty of being in a position where telling the truth required deciding whose truth to tell and in what order. "William," she said carefully, "how much do you know about your father's business interests along the river?" A small hesitation, just small enough to notice. "Some," he said. "He's been building out the freight corridor for several years. It's his primary concern right now." "Does that freight corridor require access to the Whitmore Riverland?" William's expression changed, not dramatically, but Eleanor was watching closely. "Why are you asking me that?" he said. "Because I found letters in my father's study," she said. "3 of them from your father about purchasing that acreage. My father refused each time." William said nothing. "William," Eleanor said, "I am going to ask you something, and I need you to answer me as honestly as you have always been with me. Did your father suggest this engagement to you, or was it your own idea?" The silence stretched out long enough that the answer arrived before he spoke it. "He introduced us," William said finally. "He arranged the occasion. He encouraged me to—" He stopped. Something was moving across his face, something that looked like a man doing arithmetic in his head and arriving at a sum he very much did not want to reach. He was enthusiastic about the match. "Yes," Eleanor said quietly. "I expect he was." "Eleanor, if you're suggesting—" "I'm not suggesting anything," she said. "I'm asking you to think about it, carefully, when you have had some time." He stood up. He was not angry. William was rarely angry, but he was unsettled in a way she had not seen before. It made him look younger than his years, more uncertain. "I care for you," he said. "Whatever my father's interests are or aren't, that part is real." "I know," she said. "I believe you. But there are some things I need to understand better before the dinner on Friday," she said. "That's all I can tell you right now." He left. Eleanor sat in the empty parlor and thought about what it must be like to discover that your father had treated the woman you intended to marry as a property transaction. She thought William was going to have a very uncomfortable few days. She almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The second day, Nathaniel found Elias Boone. He came to the Whitmore property in the late afternoon when the heat had flattened everything and the only sound was insects and the distant complaint of cattle. Nathaniel arrived at the back of the house rather than the front, which told Eleanor he was thinking about who might be watching the road, which told her things were moving faster than either of them had anticipated. She met him in the garden out of her aunt's sight. "Boone talked," he said without preamble. "What did he say?" "Enough." Nathaniel's voice was controlled, but underneath the control was something tight and restrained, like a wire pulled taut. He was Carter's land agent for 4 years. His job was to clear the title obstacles on the river corridor. Most of them were straightforward purchases. Your father's land was the exception. Because father wouldn't sell, wouldn't negotiate, told Carter clearly and more than once that the land was held for his family and not available at any price. Nathaniel paused. "Boone says Carter started planning the marriage arrangement approximately 18 months after your father refused the second offer. The third letter, the one that read like a threat, that was Carter testing whether fear would accomplish what money hadn't. When your father still refused, Carter shifted strategies. To eliminating the person who would inherit it," Eleanor said. "To controlling who she married," Nathaniel corrected, "which amounts to the same thing." He looked at her. "Boone witnessed the arrangement. Not the postal piece, he says he wasn't part of that, but the initial discussion with your aunt. He was present at a meeting between Carter and Margaret at the Carter estate approximately 3 years ago." Eleanor pressed her hand against the fence rail. "He'll say this," she said, "in front of others." "He'll put it in writing," Nathaniel said. "He's already left Carter's employ. He has his own legal situation to be careful about, but Carter dismissed him without settlement, and Boone he's not a man inclined to let that rest quietly. What about Reed the postal clerk? I've sent word to Richmond. I expect a reply within the day." He paused. "Eleanor, even without Reed's direct testimony, what we have now it's substantial. Boone's account, Carter's letters to your father, your aunt's admission, the timing of the engagement relative to your father's refusals." "It's enough to know," she said. "Is it enough to act on? What kind of action are you thinking about?" She looked at him. "The Friday dinner," she said. "Carter has invited half the county. It's meant to be a celebration, an announcement." She paused. "I want to go." Nathaniel looked at her carefully. "As what?" "As Eleanor Whitmore," she said. "As a woman who knows exactly what happened and is deciding in front of everyone what she chooses to do about it." The silence between them had a different quality now. Not the careful negotiated distance of two people who had been hurt and were trying to be fair to each other. Something else. Something that had less to do with caution and more to do with the fact that 5 years of absence, 31 undelivered letters, and 40 acres of riverland could not entirely undo what had existed before any of it. "That's a considerable risk," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "Thomas Carter is not a man who accepts being cornered publicly." "No," she agreed again. "He's not." "You could wait," he said. "Get Reed's statement. Take it to the county assessor. Handle this through legal channels. Quieter. Safer." "My father handled it through quiet refusals for 6 years," Eleanor said. "He died before he ran out of quiet refusals, and the next morning, Thomas Carter began planning to acquire his land through his daughter's marriage." She looked at Nathaniel steadily. "I am not interested in quiet." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "All right. Will you come to the Carter dinner? You received an invitation, didn't you? You're in Ashford, old Virginia family, regardless of circumstance. Carter would have sent one automatically." Nathaniel's jaw moved slightly. "He sent one." "Then come. Eleanor." His voice was quieter now. "If I walk into that room, the entire evening changes the moment I cross the threshold. Carter knows I've been asking questions. He'll be watching for any move." "Good," she said. "Let him watch." Something crossed Nathaniel's face, something that might have been alarm, and also might have been underneath the alarm, something that looked almost like admiration. "You are considerably more dangerous than I remembered," he said. "I've had 5 years to think," she said simply. The third day brought two things. The first was Jonas Reed's letter, arriving by fast post from Richmond in the late morning. It was 3 pages long, written in the cramped, careful hand of a man who understood that what he was committing to paper could either protect him or destroy him, and was trying to calibrate exactly how much truth served which purpose. It was enough, more than enough. Reed named Carter directly. Named the arrangement, the monthly payment, the specific instruction to hold letters bearing the Ashford name and destroy any routing documentation. Named the date it began, which was 6 months before Eleanor's father died, which meant Carter had been working this plan for longer than any of them had realized. Eleanor read it standing at her father's desk, her hand pressed flat on the survey map of the eastern 40 acres. Then she looked up. Her aunt was standing in the doorway. Margaret had aged in the last 3 days. Not dramatically, she was still composed, still straight-backed, but there was something in her eyes that had changed, something that looked less like management and more like someone who had spent 72 hours sitting with the full weight of what they had done. "There is a letter," Eleanor said, "from Jonas Reed. He was Carter's postal arrangement in Richmond." Her aunt said nothing. "He names Carter, he names the payment, and he names the date it began." Eleanor set the letter down. 6 months before father died. "Did you know that?" "No," Margaret said. Quietly. "I did not know that." "Carter was working this before father was even gone," Eleanor said. "He was planning it while father was still refusing him. He didn't wait for father to die. He started building the machinery before he even knew he would have the opportunity to use it." Her aunt put her hand on the doorframe. "I did not know that part," she said again. Her voice was different now, something in it that Eleanor had not heard before. "Eleanor, I know there is nothing I can say that—" "There isn't," Eleanor said, not harshly, honestly. "But I'm not asking you to say anything. I'm asking you to do something." Her aunt looked at her. "Friday evening," Eleanor said. "The Carter dinner. I need you to come with me." The silence was considerable. "Eleanor, you were part of this," Eleanor said. "I am not saying that to punish you. I am saying it because it means you have the ability to help undo it. In front of the same people, Carter expects to watch him announce my future." She paused. "You were at that meeting with Carter. Boone was there. He'll testify to it. If you come forward willingly, if you tell what you know before he can control how it looks, it changes everything." "He'll be furious," her aunt said. "Yes, he has a great deal of influence in this county." "He does," Eleanor agreed. "And in 3 days, it is going to matter considerably less than it does today." Margaret looked at her for a long time. At her niece, who had sat quietly in this house for 5 years, writing letters that were never answered, building a life around a silence that had been manufactured by someone else, and who was now standing at her father's desk with a postal clerk's testimony in one hand and her own clear-eyed reckoning in the other. "Your father," Margaret said finally, "would have been very proud of you." "I know," Eleanor said. "Come on Friday." Margaret looked down at her hands for a moment. "All right," she said. "I will come." The second thing the third day brought was William Carter at her door at 4:30 in the afternoon. He did not come with his hat turning in his hands this time. He came with his jaw set and his eyes carrying something that had not been there 2 days ago, something that looked like a man who had gone and done his own asking and was not pleased with the answers he'd received. Eleanor let him in. They sat in the parlor. She did not call for tea. "I spoke with my father," William said. "I thought you might." "I asked him directly whether he had interest in the Whitmore River land." His voice was controlled. "He said it was a business matter and had nothing to do with my marriage." "What did you say to that?" "I said that a business matter that shapes the circumstances of my marriage has everything to do with my marriage." His jaw tightened. "He told me I was being naive, that this is how things are done in families with property, and he expected me to understand that." Eleanor watched him. "I don't understand it," William said. "I want to be clear about that." Whatever my father arranged, whatever he and your aunt decided between them, I didn't know. I need you to believe that." "I do believe it," Eleanor said. "William." "I care for you," he said. "I have said that. It's true. But I am not. I am not willing to be part of something that was built on this." He looked at her directly. "What is it you're planning to do on Friday?" She told him. Not all of it, but enough. William listened without interrupting, which took more discipline than she'd expected, because what she was telling him was not easy to listen to. He listened to the postal clerk's account, to Boone's testimony, to his father's letters in her father's drawer, to 3 years of planning that had treated them both, Eleanor and William alike, as pieces in a transaction neither of them consented to. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "My father is going to say I've betrayed him," he said finally. "Yes. He'll say you orchestrated this, that Ashford came back and that you conspired together to embarrass the family." "People will say many things," Eleanor said. "What matters is what's true." William looked at the floor. Then he looked up. "What do you need from me?" he said. Eleanor held his gaze. "On Friday evening," she said, "I am going to stand up at your father's table and tell the county what was done. And when I do, you are going to have to choose, publicly, what you stand for." "That's not a small thing to ask." "No," she said, "it is not." He breathed slowly. "Ashford," he said, are you—" "Don't ask me that," she said gently. "Not tonight. Tonight I need you to decide what kind of man you are. The rest of it can wait." He nodded once. He stood up, picked up his hat, and looked at her for a moment with an expression that held too many things for her to name all of them. "Friday," he said. "Friday," she agreed. He walked out. Eleanor sat alone in the parlor for a long time after the door closed behind him. Outside, the summer dark was coming down slow and heavy over Virginia, the way it does in July, when the days are so long that the night feels earned. Somewhere 3 miles east, Thomas Carter was sitting at his table, working out the details of an engagement dinner he believed he controlled entirely. Eleanor picked up the letter from Jonas Reed. She read it one more time. Then she folded it, added it to the Carter letters from her father's drawer, and went upstairs to decide what she was going to wear on Friday. Whatever was coming, she intended to walk into it looking exactly like what she was. Eleanor Whitmore, her father's daughter, owner of a contested 40 acres along the South Fork of the Rivanna. A woman who was done letting other people choose her life. The Friday evening arrived the way a verdict arrives, not suddenly, but with the terrible patience of something that has been building long enough that everyone in the room already knows what it is before it is spoken. Eleanor dressed without hurrying. She chose the blue dress, the one her aunt had suggested for the occasion, back when the occasion was supposed to mean something entirely different. She did not choose it out of sentiment or irony. She chose it because it had been her mother's favorite color, and because her mother had been a woman who walked into difficult rooms without apology, and Eleanor needed to borrow that quality tonight. Her aunt knocked at 5:30. Margaret stood in the doorway, already dressed, her posture carrying a quality Eleanor had not seen in it before, not the managed composure of a woman controlling a situation, but something quieter and more effortful. The composure of a woman who had looked at what she had done and made a decision about it, and was now living forward from that decision, regardless of the cost. "Are you ready?" Eleanor asked. "No," Margaret said honestly, "but I'm going." They rode together in silence. Nathaniel was already waiting at the crossroads a 1/4 mile from the Carter gate, as they had arranged. He fell in alongside them without ceremony, which was exactly right. This was not a rescue. He knew that. Eleanor had been very clear about that. This was 3 people who each held a piece of a truth that belonged together, riding toward the place where that truth needed to be spoken. "Reed's letter," he said quietly as they rode. "Inside my dress," Eleanor said. "The Carter correspondence is with it, and Boone's written account." "William, I don't know," she said. "I told him what I was doing. What he chooses is his own." Nathaniel nodded. He did not say anything else, which was one of the things she had always, even in the long years of not knowing, remembered about him. His ability to understand when silence was the more respectful thing. They reached the Carter estate as the last of the July light was going golden heavy over the fields. The carriages were already lined up along the drive, half the county as promised. Eleanor recognized vehicles from 3 of the oldest Virginia families in the area, a county judge's rig, and the Reverend's plain 2-horse cart at the far end. Thomas Carter had assembled his audience with care. She dismounted, smoothed her dress, and walked toward the door. She did not hesitate at the threshold. The room was everything Thomas Carter intended it to be. Long tables set with the Carter family silver, candles already lit against the coming dark. 40-some guests arranged in the particular configuration of people who have gathered to witness something they consider already decided. Carter himself stood at the far end of the room, a large man florid with summer heat and self-satisfaction. The kind of man who has spent enough years being obeyed that he has forgotten what resistance looks like, and would not immediately recognize it if it walked through his door in a blue dress. He saw Eleanor and smiled. He saw Nathaniel behind her, and the smile did not disappear exactly, but something behind it shifted. "Miss Whitmore," Carter said, crossing toward them with his arms extended in the gesture of a man welcoming something he believes he owns. "We are delighted you've arrived." His eyes moved to Nathaniel with a calculation that was over in under a second. "Mr. Ashford, I didn't expect you this evening." "I received an invitation," Nathaniel said pleasantly. "So you did." Carter's voice was smooth. He had been managing situations for 30 years, and he was good at it. "Welcome back to Virginia." He turned back to Eleanor. "William is just inside. He'll be glad to see you." "I'm sure he will," Eleanor said. She walked past him into the room. She felt Carter's gaze on her back, that particular kind of attention that is not yet alarm, but has passed through ordinary watchfulness and is approaching something more active. She had perhaps 12 minutes before he understood what was happening, possibly less if he was quicker than she was giving him credit for. She found William near the window. He looked like a man who had not slept well in 3 days, which was accurate, and like a man who had made a decision he was not entirely certain about, which was also accurate. He looked up when she approached, and something in his expression settled not into relief, but into a kind of resolution. The expression of a man who had been waiting to see which version of himself was going to show up tonight, and had just gotten his answer. "Eleanor," he said. "William." She stood close enough to speak quietly. "How is your father this evening?" "Confident," William said, and the word carried a weight that suggested he did not mean it as a compliment. "He'll be less so shortly," she said. William looked at her her aunt standing 3 steps behind her, at Nathaniel across the room, already engaged in conversation with Judge Harlan Myers, which was not an accidental position. Eleanor had mentioned the judge's name to Nathaniel 2 days ago as a man of documented integrity and considerable community standing. "You brought Ashford," William said. "He brought himself," Eleanor said. "He received an invitation, same as everyone. My father is going to say you orchestrated this entire evening." "Your father is welcome to say whatever he likes," Eleanor said. "What matters is what I say, and what you say, and what your father says in response, and what 40 guests hear when we say it." William was quiet for a moment. "My father approached me this afternoon," he said. "Before this evening. He told me that Ashford's return was a destabilizing element, and that I needed to be prepared to manage it." He paused. "Those were his words. Destabilizing element. Like you were a property dispute." "I am a property dispute," Eleanor said. "That's rather the point." "Eleanor." "William." She put her hand briefly on his arm. "I'm not angry with you. I want you to know that. Whatever happens tonight, I need you to know that my quarrel is not with you." "I know," he said. "But I also know that after tonight, whatever we might have, after tonight," she said gently, "you'll know exactly what you're building on, whatever you choose to build. That's more than most people get." He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who is being let go of kindly, and knows it, and is trying to decide whether kindness makes it easier or harder. "What do you need me to do?" he said. "When the moment comes," she said, "don't lie. That's all." He nodded once. She turned back to the room. Carter called the gathering to order at 7 o'clock. He did it with the easy authority of a man on his own ground, a raised hand. A few words, the room quieting by habit and long practice. He spoke of the summer, of the county's prosperity, of the good fortune of families whose interests aligned. He spoke of William and Eleanor with the warm proprietary satisfaction of a man describing an investment that has matured. Eleanor stood at the table and listened and kept her face entirely still. She was counting. Carter had spoken for approximately 4 minutes. The guests were relaxed, attentive, drinking his wine and accepting his framing without question, because they had no reason not to, and because Thomas Carter had spent 30 years giving them no reason to question him. That was about to change. She waited until he said the word land. He said it almost casually, in the way a man says a word he has rehearsed until it sounds natural. Something about the families of this county being bound together by shared history, shared ground, shared commitment to the prosperity of the river valley. Eleanor set down her glass. She said clearly and without raising her voice, "Mr. Carter." The room heard the tone before it heard the words. That was how it worked. The quality of a voice reaches people a half-second before the content does, and what reached 40 people at Thomas Carter's table in that half-second was not the voice of a young woman making polite conversation. Carter looked at her. "Miss Whitmore." "I wonder if I might say a few words," she said. In the spirit of the occasion, a beat of silence. Carter's expression was still pleasant, still managed, but something behind his eyes was moving fast. "Of course," he said, because he couldn't say otherwise. Not in front of 40 guests, without revealing that he had reason to be afraid of what she might say. Eleanor looked out at the room. "I am grateful to be here this evening," she began. "I am grateful for the hospitality of this house and for the presence of so many people who knew my father." She paused. "My father was a man who believed that property and reputation were two things a person built slowly and carefully and honestly. He used to say that a man who would take a shortcut to acquire land would take a shortcut in everything else. I thought of that a great deal this week." The room was very quiet. Carter said, "Miss Whitmore, perhaps this isn't—" "I found letters in my father's study." Eleanor continued as though he hadn't spoken. 3 letters addressed to him from this house. The earliest was dated 6 years ago. Each one was an offer to purchase the eastern 40 acres of the Whitmore property, the river acreage my father acquired in 1808 and refused to sell at any price. She heard the shift in the room. Not a sound exactly. A quality change. 40 people recalibrating. "My father refused each offer," she said. Politely, then firmly then, in terms that should have been entirely clear. He died still refusing. She looked at Carter. "Within 6 months of his death, I found myself being introduced to your son, Mr. Carter. I found my aunt being visited privately at your estate. I found eventually that a postal clerk in Richmond had been paid by arrangement traceable to this house to ensure that letters written to me by Mr. Nathaniel Ashford never arrived." The silence was complete. Carter's face had done several things in rapid succession and had settled on a version of controlled fury that he was keeping just barely below the surface. "These are extraordinary claims," he said, and his voice was still steady, which meant he was a more skilled opponent than she had been entirely prepared for. "I would be very careful, Miss Whitmore, about the accusations you bring into my home." "I have brought documentation," Eleanor said. "I have the 3 letters you wrote to my father. I have a written account from your former land agent, Elias Boone, who was present at a meeting between you and my aunt 2 years ago at which this arrangement was discussed." She paused. "And I have a letter from Jonas Reed, who worked the Richmond postal routes for 8 years and was paid to hold and destroy any correspondence bearing the Ashford name." Carter stood very still. "Reed is a dismissed postal clerk with grievances," he said. "His word is worth nothing. His word is supported by payment records he kept, Eleanor said, and by Boone's account, and by my aunt's own testimony, which she is prepared to give. She glanced at Margaret, who was standing straight-backed and pale at the side of the room, and who met Eleanor's eyes and did not look away. Carter turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. His voice had dropped a register. It was no longer the voice of a man managing a room. It was the voice of a man reminding a woman of what she owed him. "I think perhaps Eleanor is overwrought. The return of old acquaintances, the pressure of an engagement. It is understandable that a young woman might—" "Don't," Margaret said. One word, quiet, final. "Margaret." "I was at that meeting," Margaret said. She looked at the room rather than at Carter. At the 40 faces that were watching, silent and attentive in the way people watch when they understand they are witnessing something that will be spoken of for years. "He told me Nathaniel Ashford had settled in Europe with another woman. He showed me letters he said proved it. He told me the kindest thing I could do for my niece was encourage the engagement and allow the silence to do its work." She paused. "I believed him. I should not have, and I should have asked my niece before I agreed to any of it." The room broke open. Not loudly. The guests of Thomas Carter were not the kind of people to make a scene, but the collective recalibration of 40 people simultaneously revising their understanding of an event they thought they already knew that has a sound, a quality. It moved through the room like a change in air pressure. Carter turned to his son, and that was the moment Eleanor understood she had underestimated the evening, because Carter looked at William with an expression she had not anticipated. Not fury, not desperation, but something colder and more deliberate than either. The expression of a man who has already identified his next move. "William," Carter said, "these people have come here tonight with documents they claim are evidence of wrongdoing. As my son, I expect you to—" "Don't," William said. His voice was very quiet, the same register his father's had just been. The room noticed. Carter went still. "I spoke with Mr. Boone this afternoon," William said. He was looking at his father, and his face carried something that Eleanor thought might be the most painful expression she had seen in the entire painful week, the expression of a man who loves someone, and has just understood clearly, perhaps for the first time, who that person actually is. "I asked him directly what his role was in the matter of the Whitmore engagement." He paused. "He told me." "Boone is—" "He told me," William repeated with more force. "He told me about the Riverland, about the postal arrangement, about the meeting with Mrs. Whitmore 2 years ago." He paused. "He told me that you said in that meeting that a 40-acre parcel was worth considerably more than the inconvenience of one young woman's romantic attachment." The silence that followed was the kind that occupies an entire room like water filling a vessel. Carter said nothing. "I have been in this house my entire life," William said. "I have watched you operate. I have told myself that the ways in which you acquire what you want are simply the ways of a practical man. That business and sentiment do not belong together, and that a son who does not understand this is a naive son." He looked at his father steadily. "I have been naive, but not in the way you mean." Carter found his voice. "You are embarrassing this family in front of—" "I am ending an engagement." William said, "That should never have been arranged the way it was arranged." He turned to Eleanor. The room watched him turn. "Miss Whitmore, I owe you an apology. Not for what my father did, I did not know the extent of it, but for what I did not think to question." He paused. "You deserved better than a man who did not ask harder questions." Eleanor looked at him. "Thank you, William," she said. Something in his expression shifted. Relief, grief, and something steadier than either. He nodded once, put down his glass, and walked to the door. He did not look back. Badber. The room did not recover from that. Carter tried. He was a skilled man. Thomas Carter, skilled at managing narratives, at controlling rooms, at turning the emotional temperature of a gathering back toward whatever outcome he required. He tried several approaches in quick succession, questioning the validity of Reed's letter, suggesting Boone had personal grievances that colored his account, implying that Eleanor's judgment had been compromised by Ashford's return and the old attachment that came with it. Judge Myers, who had been standing quietly near the window for the last several minutes, with an expression of increasing gravity, cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I have known your family for 20 years. I say what I am about to say with that history in mind." He looked at Carter steadily. "These documents will need to be reviewed. The postal matter in particular is a federal concern. Reed's letter, if authenticated, describes an arrangement that carries serious legal implications." He paused. "I would strongly suggest that this evening you say nothing further until you have consulted your own counsel." Carter stared at him. "Tom," said one of the older guests, a man whose family had known the Whitmore family for 3 generations, "I think the judge is right." Carter's jaw tightened. He looked at Eleanor, and in that look, in those 3 or 4 seconds, during which Thomas Carter assessed Eleanor Whitmore across a room full of witnesses, she saw exactly what he was. Not a villain in the way stories describe villains. A man who had simply never believed that a 24-year-old woman with no father, a compliant aunt, and a sentimental attachment to an absent man was capable of walking into his dining room and dismantling 6 years of careful planning in 40 minutes. He had underestimated her. That, Eleanor thought, was his fundamental error. "This is not over," Carter said. He said it quietly, not to the room, to her. "I know," she said, just as quietly. "I didn't expect it to be." He turned and left through the side door. The room exhaled. Nathaniel reached her side as the guests began the low, urgent murmur of people processing something that has exceeded their expectations for an evening. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. She surprised herself by meaning it. "He'll regroup," Nathaniel said. "Tonight was not the end. He'll work to discredit Reed. Boone, your aunt. He still has influence in this county, and he'll use every piece of it." "I know," Eleanor said. "But he'll be using it defensively now. That's different." Nathaniel looked at her. "Judge Myers," she said. "He heard all of it. He's going to look at those documents." "He's one man." "He's the right man," Eleanor said. "My father trusted him. He knew my father for 20 years. She paused. "And he's already thinking about what he has jurisdiction over and what needs to go higher." "Eleanor." Nathaniel's voice was quieter than the noise of the room around them, and she understood that he was not talking about Carter anymore. "Tonight was what you did tonight. What I did tonight was necessary," she said. "Yes," he said. "It was." He looked at her. "How are you?" "Not strategically. How are you?" She considered that for a moment. "Frightened," she said honestly. "Carter was right that this isn't over. I broke something tonight that cannot be unbroken, and the consequences of that are going to arrive in ways I cannot entirely predict." She paused. "And also," she stopped. "Also," he said. "Also, I feel more like myself than I have in 5 years," she said. "Which is a strange thing to feel in the middle of what is very likely to be the most complicated period of my life." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have the 31 letters, at the inn. I said you could have them when you were ready." Eleanor looked at him. "I'm not ready tonight," she said. "Tonight I need to get my aunt home and think about what Carter is planning and talk to Judge Myers in the morning." She paused. "But I want them." "They're yours," he said. They always were. Margaret appeared at Eleanor's elbow, pale and straight-backed, and carrying herself with the particular dignity of a woman who has just done the most difficult thing she has done in her life and is not sure whether it will be enough. "Are you ready?" Eleanor asked her. "Yes," Margaret said. "I believe I am." Eleanor took her aunt's arm. She walked through the Carter dining room toward the door, through the 40 guests who parted to let them pass through the particular silence of people who have witnessed something they will spend the next month discussing. She did not look back at the room. She looked forward through the open door into the Virginia night, warm and heavy, and full of the sound of summer insects and the distant water of the river that ran through 40 acres of her father's land. Her land, that nobody had managed to take from her. She stepped outside. Behind her in the room, she heard Judge Myers say something to the man standing beside him. Something low and considered. She heard her own name and the name Ashford and the word documents. She kept walking. There was a great deal still to face, but she had walked into that room with the truth, and she had said it plainly in front of everyone who needed to hear it, and Thomas Carter had looked at her across his own table and seen perhaps for the first time what he was actually dealing with. That was not nothing. That was Eleanor thought as she helped her aunt into the carriage and felt the warm night air settle around her shoulders like something laid down after a long time carrying it. That was the beginning of the only kind of justice that actually meant anything. The kind that started with a woman deciding she was done being quiet. The morning after the Carter dinner, Eleanor woke before dawn and lay still in the dark for exactly 3 minutes. Then she got up. There was no point in lying there. Her mind had been moving all night, not in the restless circular way of anxiety, but in the focused, forward-leaning way of someone who understands that the first battle is over, and the real fight begins now. She had dismantled Carter's narrative in front of 40 witnesses. That was done. What remained was the harder work making sure the truth she had spoken in one room could not be quietly buried by the time it reached the next one. She dressed and went downstairs and found her aunt already in the kitchen, sitting at the plain wooden table with a cup of tea gone cold in front of her, and the expression of a woman who has not slept. "He'll go to the county recorder first," Margaret said without looking up. She said it the way a person says something they have been working out alone for several hours. "Carter. He'll want to establish the property claim through official channels before Judge Myers can open an inquiry. If he can get a lien filed against the Riverland, some pretext about boundary disputes, it complicates everything." Eleanor sat down across from her. "How do you know that?" she asked. "Because it's what I would do," Margaret said, "if I were him." She looked up. "I have spent 30 years managing difficult men, Eleanor. I know how they think when they're cornered." She paused. "I should have used that knowledge better." Eleanor looked at her aunt, at the tired, honest face of a woman reckoning with herself, and felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, not entirely. But the beginning of understanding that the story of what Margaret had done was more complicated than simple betrayal. It did not make the betrayal smaller. It made it human, which was harder. "We need to get to Judge Myers before Carter does," Eleanor said. "Yes," Margaret agreed. "We do." They arrived at the judge's house at 7:30 in the morning, which was early enough to catch him before he left for the courthouse, and early enough to suggest urgency without being so early as to seem panicked. Eleanor had learned from her father that the manner in which you make a request shapes the response as much as the request itself. Judge Harlan Myers answered the door himself, already dressed, which meant either he was an early riser by habit or he had been expecting someone to come knocking this morning and had prepared accordingly. Eleanor suspected the latter. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Mrs. Whitmore." He stepped back from the door. "Come in." They sat in his study, which was the room of a man who had spent decades making decisions about other people's property and other people's honesty, and had developed strong opinions about both. Books on Virginia land law, correspondence stacked with the precision of someone who knew exactly where everything was. A portrait of his wife above the fireplace, which Eleanor noted because it was the kind of detail that told you something about a man's actual character, as opposed to his professional one. Eleanor put the documents on his desk, all of them. The Carter letters to her father, Reed's letter from Richmond, Boone's written account. She laid them out in chronological order, the way her father had taught her to organize an argument, not from most dramatic to least, but from first to last, so the shape of the thing was visible. Myers read without interrupting. He read for a long time. When he finished, he set the last page down and looked at Eleanor over the tops of his reading glasses. "The postal matter," he said. "You understand this is federal jurisdiction." "I understand that," Eleanor said. What I need to know is what can be done at the county level, and how quickly. The property claim is county. The conspiracy around the engagement that's murkier legally. Interference with correspondence is federal. Carter's arrangement with Reed would fall under that. He paused. Reed's letter names him directly. By name, with dates and payment amounts. Myers tapped the letter. Carter will contest its authenticity. I expected that, Eleanor said. Boone's account corroborates the timeline, and my aunt is willing to testify about the meeting at the Carter estate. He looked at Margaret. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, I want to be certain you understand what you're agreeing to. Carter has friends in this county. Long friendships. Testifying against him carries consequences. Judge Myers, Margaret said, I have been carrying the consequences of not testifying for 3 years. I find I prefer this version. Something in Myers' expression shifted, not quite admiration, but close. I'll open an inquiry, he said. Formally. Today. He paused. This will not move quickly, Miss Whitmore. I want you to be prepared for that. Carter's attorney is competent, and he'll use every available mechanism to delay and complicate. I know, Eleanor said, but an inquiry means it's on record, officially, and that changes what Carter can do next. Myers looked at her for a moment. Your father was a good man, he said. I think he would find this morning satisfactory. Eleanor stood up. I'll take that, she said. Carter moved the same morning. Eleanor found out from the kitchen girl who had heard from the blacksmith's son, who was apparently present at the county recorder's office when Carter's attorney arrived at 9 o'clock with a stack of documents and a request to file a boundary dispute claim against the eastern 40 acres of the Whitmore property. She was at the Whitmore property when she heard it standing in her father's study, with Nathaniel going through the original survey documents her father had filed in 1808. He's faster than I gave him credit for, Nathaniel said. He was already preparing this, Eleanor said. This isn't a response to last night. He had this ready in case something went wrong. She looked at the survey map spread across the desk. He's claiming the eastern boundary is disputed, but this survey, she pressed her finger to the map, was filed with the county in 1808 and never contested. In 7 years, nobody disputed this line. Until now. Until he needed a reason to cloud the title. She straightened. Can Boone speak to the boundary survey? He was Carter's land agent. He would know what Carter's own maps showed. I can ask him, Nathaniel said. But Eleanor, a boundary dispute, even a fraudulent one, takes time to resolve. Months, possibly more. That's the point. Carter doesn't expect to win the boundary claim. He expects it to occupy the inquiry long enough for him to work the political side. What political side? Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. He has friends on the county committee, he said. Men he's done business with for years. Men who owe him favors or money or both. He paused. There's a county committee meeting in 3 weeks. Carter will be working between now and then to shape the narrative. To make last night look like a domestic dispute. A young woman's emotions. A spurned suitor causing disruption. Eleanor looked at him. He'll make it about you, she said. Your return. He'll say you came back and turned my head, and I made accusations out of sentiment. Yes, Nathaniel said. That's the story he'll tell. And how many people will believe it? Some, Nathaniel said honestly. Not all, but enough to create doubt. And doubt is all he needs to slow this down. Eleanor turned back to the survey map. Then we need something he can't reframe, she said. Something that isn't about me or you or sentiment or old letters. She was quiet for a moment. Boone. When he worked for Carter, did he keep records of his own? He said he kept ledgers, Nathaniel said slowly. Carter's land acquisition costs, payment records. He said he kept them because he didn't trust Carter to pay him fairly, and he wanted documentation. He looked at her. You think there's something in those ledgers? I think a man who paid a postal clerk monthly for a year and a half paid him from somewhere, Eleanor said. And that somewhere is in a ledger, And if that ledger shows payments to Reed or to anyone who can be connected to Reed, that's not sentiment, that's a transaction, and a transaction can be traced. Nathaniel looked at her with the expression she was becoming familiar with, the one that was not quite surprise and not quite admiration, but sat precisely between the two. "I'll go to Boone," he said. "Today," Eleanor said. "Today." He agreed. He was at the door when she said Nathaniel. He stopped. "Last night," she said. "After in the room. You asked how I was." She paused. "I gave you the strategic answer." "I know," he said. "You don't have to give me the other one now." "I know I don't," she said. "I'm choosing to." She looked at him. "I'm frightened. Not of Carter. Of what happens after Carter. Of what it looks like when the immediate crisis is resolved and there's nothing left to do but decide what my actual life is." She paused. "I've been in a crisis for 5 years. One kind or another. I'm not entirely sure I remember what life looks like when it isn't one." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "I remember," he said, "what your life looked like before, what you looked like in it." He held her gaze. "It was worth coming back for. Whatever you decide. It was worth it just to see you do what you did last night." She looked at him. "Go get those ledgers," she said. He went. He came back at 2 in the afternoon. He came through the back of the property the same way he had 2 days before, and Eleanor met him in the garden, and she could tell before he reached her that he had found something because of the way he was walking. Not faster than usual, but with a quality of controlled energy. The walk of a man carrying news he needs to deliver carefully. He handed her a folded paper. "Boone made copies," Nathaniel said. When he left Carter's employ, he took copies of the relevant ledger pages. He kept them because he thought he might need them someday. He paused. He was right. Eleanor unfolded the paper. It was a copied ledger page. Boone's handwriting, neat and accountant careful, replicating a payment record. Monthly entries over 18 months to a notation that read simply, R. Richmond Postal, followed by a sum and a date. The dates began 6 weeks before Eleanor's father died. She looked up. "He started this before Father was even ill," she said. "Before anyone knew he was ill," Nathaniel said. "Carter knew something about the state of your father's health before the family did, or he was simply planning ahead. Either way, those payments begin before your father's death and continue through the period when your engagement to William was being arranged. This connects the postal arrangement directly to Carter's financial records," Eleanor said. "Not Reed's word, not Boone's testimony about a conversation. An actual ledger entry." "An actual ledger entry," Nathaniel confirmed. Eleanor pressed the paper flat with both hands. "Take this to Judge Myers," she said. "Today. This afternoon. Don't wait." "I intended to," Nathaniel said, "but I wanted you to see it first." She looked at him. "Why?" "Because you've been carrying this alone for a week," he said. "And I wanted you to have the moment of seeing it before it became evidence." She stood very still for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you." He took the paper and went to Myers. The next twist came from a direction Eleanor had not anticipated. It came from William Carter. He appeared at the Whitmore property the following morning, not at the front door, but at the garden gate, which meant he was being careful about being seen, which told Eleanor something about the state of affairs at the Carter estate. He looked like a man who had spent the last 48 hours in a state of sustained internal upheaval, and had emerged from it having reached a decision he wasn't entirely comfortable with, but intended to honor regardless. "My father came to me last night," William said. They were standing in the garden. He had declined to come inside, which Eleanor thought was perhaps his way of keeping the conversation contained to what it needed to be. "He told me that if I didn't publicly support his account of what happened Friday, If I didn't retract what I said at the dinner, he would cut me from the estate entirely. All of it. The business, the property, the inheritance. Eleanor said nothing. She waited. He said that I had betrayed the family in front of the county, and that if I could not demonstrate loyalty, I was not entitled to the Carter name or anything that came with it. William's jaw was tight. He said it very calmly, the way he says things that he means completely. "What did you tell him?" Eleanor said. "I told him I needed to think about it," William said. "Which bought me until this morning." He paused. "I've thought about it." "And I went to Myers last night," William said. "Before I came here. Myers told me about the ledger pages." Eleanor went still. "He told me the dates," William said. "When those payments started." Something moved across his face. Something complicated and painful. "My father was paying to intercept Ashford's letters 6 weeks before your father died, while your father was still alive. I didn't know if you knew that part." "I knew," Eleanor said. "I didn't," William said. "I found out last night." He looked at her steadily. "My father has done a great many things I accepted because I told myself they were business. That's how he taught me to see them. Business decisions, practical choices." He stopped. "There is no version of what he did to you and to Ashford that I can call a business decision. He took years from you. He arranged your life like a deed transfer." His voice was controlled, but the control was effortful. "I cannot retract what I said at the dinner. And I cannot pretend I don't know what I now know. Even if it costs you the estate," Eleanor said. "Even then." She looked at him. "William," she said carefully, "what your father threatened, losing the inheritance, that is not a small thing. I don't want you to make a decision in the heat of this moment that you'll spend years regretting." "I won't regret it," he said. "That's the part I've been thinking about all night. What I would regret is staying quiet. Again." He paused. "I let this happen because I didn't ask questions. I'm not going to compound that by refusing to answer them now." Eleanor regarded him for a long moment. "Myers needs you to repeat what you told me about your father's approach to you last night," she said. "The threat. In writing, if you're willing." "I know," William said. "He told me. I've already agreed." Something in Eleanor's chest shifted. "You're a good man, William," she said. And she meant it. Not as consolation, not as kindness dressed up as truth, as an actual truth plainly stated. He looked at her. "I hope so," he said. "I'm working on finding out." He paused. "Miss Whitmore, Eleanor, I hope whatever happens from here, I hope you get what was stolen from you back, all of it." He tipped his hat. He walked away. Eleanor stood in the garden for a long moment after he was gone, feeling the particular weight of a situation that had become more than she originally anticipated, not more difficult, but more human, more layered, more full of people making hard choices for different reasons, and some of those choices being the right ones after all. The inquiry moved faster than Myers had predicted, because Carter made a mistake. He always made the mistake that powerful men make when they have operated without consequences. For too long, he underestimated the documentation. He sent his attorney to challenge Reed's letter on the grounds of the postal clerk's credibility. His attorney argued in a written response filed with the county clerk that Reed was a disgruntled former employee with a personal grievance and no corroborating evidence. The problem was that the ledger pages were corroborating evidence, and Carter's attorney in his written challenge had inadvertently confirmed several details of Reed's account in the course of disputing them, specific enough details that could only have come from someone who knew the arrangement. Myers caught it. He sent word to Eleanor on the 4th day after the dinner. The inquiry will proceed formally. A county committee review has been scheduled. I would ask you and your principal witnesses to be available. Eleanor read the note standing at her father's desk. She thought about her father declining Carter's first offer 6 years ago, writing back in careful, firm language that the land was not available, declining again, declining a third time. never knowing that his refusals were simply being rerouted, that Carter was already building a longer path to what he wanted. Her father had trusted the rightness of his own no. She intended to honor that. Margaret came to her that evening, not with justifications this time, not with explanations. She came with a small wooden box that Eleanor did not recognize. A plain thing, undecorated, the kind of box that has no sentimental value itself, but has been used to hold something that does. She set it on the table between them. "These were returned to me," Margaret said, "by Carter's man, 2 years ago. He said they were undeliverable correspondence that he had come across through postal channels." She paused. "I knew what they were." Eleanor looked at the box. "I told myself I was keeping them for you," Margaret said. "That when the time was right, when you were settled, I would give them to you. That I was simply protecting you from more pain in the immediate term." She paused. "I've told myself a great many things over the past 3 years. Eleanor opened the box. Inside were letters. Her handwriting. The letters she had sent to Nathaniel in Europe during the year she had continued writing after his responses stopped. The letters she had poured herself into. The letters she had sent into what she believed was silence, and eventually painfully given up. Her own words in her own hand, kept in a box in her aunt's possession for 2 years. She did not say anything for a long time. "He never stopped receiving mine either," Eleanor said finally. "You told me he'd stopped responding, but my letters were held here." "Yes," Margaret said. "So he was writing to me, and I wasn't receiving them, and I was writing to him, and he wasn't receiving them. And all of it, everything was sitting in this box, and in a postal clerk's drawer in Richmond." "Yes," Margaret said again, quietly. Eleanor closed the box. She sat with it for a moment. "I'm going to take these to Nathaniel," she said. Margaret nodded. "Eleanor." Her aunt's voice was low. "I know there is. I know an apology is not sufficient. I'm not offering it as sufficient. I'm simply—" She stopped. "I'm sorry. For all of it." Eleanor looked at her aunt. "I know," she said. It was not forgiveness. They both understood that. But it was acknowledgement, which was the ground forgiveness eventually grows from if the conditions allow. It was the beginning of something that did not yet have a name, but was not nothing. Eleanor picked up the box and went to find Nathaniel. He was at the inn, sitting at the plain table near the window, with a cup of coffee he'd apparently forgotten to drink, looking over a letter when she knocked. He opened the door and read her face before she said a word. "What happened?" he said. She held up the box. He looked at it, then at her. "My aunt had them," Eleanor said. "My letters to you, all of them. Carter's man gave them to her 2 years ago, and she kept them." Nathaniel was very still. "How many?" he said. "I don't know yet. I haven't counted." She paused. "They were sent, Nathaniel. They were written and sent, and they existed. They just never reached you." He looked at the box for a long moment. Then he opened the door wider and stepped back from it. "Will you sit down?" he said. She came inside. She sat at the table. He sat across from her. Between them she set the box, and they opened it together, and she watched him read her own words back to herself in the expressions that moved across his face, as he read recognition, grief, something that was not grief, but sat close to it. He read without speaking. She sat without filling the silence, because this was not a moment that required filling. When he finished, he set the last letter down. He looked at her. "You wrote to me about your father," he said. "When he was ill. You wrote about sitting with him in the evenings." "Yes." "I didn't know he was ill," Nathaniel said. "I didn't know until after. Someone mentioned it in a letter months after the fact, as something that had passed." His voice was even, but the evenness was work. "I should have known. You were alone with that, and I should have—" "You couldn't have known," Eleanor said. "That's the point. That's what was done to us." "I know," he said. "I know that. It doesn't make it easier to sit with." No, she agreed. It doesn't. They sat in silence for a moment with the letters between them, and 5 years of absence, and a box full of words that had been written and meant and never received, and the particular tenderness of two people who have found each other again through something that should have been impossible, and are not yet entirely sure what to do with that. "Nathaniel," Eleanor said. He looked at her. "I'm not ready to make any decisions," she said, "about us, about what this is or could be. I want to be honest about that." She paused. "I've spent a week making decisions about Carter and the inquiry and the county committee, and I have very little capacity left for decisions of a different kind." "I know," he said, "but I'm also—" She stopped. "I'm not ready," she said. "I don't know how to say that without sounding—" "I understand what you mean," he said. She looked at him. You mean you're not standing at a closed door," he said. "You're standing at one that you haven't opened yet, and you're not sure when you'll be ready to open it, but you know it's there." "Yes," she said. "That." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I came home, Eleanor. Not for the inquiry. Not for Carter. I came home because I am done living at a distance from my own life." He held her gaze. "And you are a very significant part of whatever that life looks like." The room held very still around that sentence. "The county committee meeting is in 2 weeks," Eleanor said finally. "Practically." Returning to the ground she was more certain of. "I know," he said. "After that," she said. "Whatever the outcome after that, I want to have a different conversation." "I'll be there for that conversation," he said. "However long it takes." Eleanor stood up. She picked up the box and held it against her chest. "I'm taking these home," she said. "My letters. I'm keeping them." "They're yours," he said. "They've always been yours." She went to the door. Then she stopped with her hand on the frame and said without turning around, "Read the one dated November 1812. The 3rd page. I wrote something I never said to you out loud." She paused. "I'd like you to know I meant it." She walked out before he could answer. She walked home through the Virginia evening with her letters pressed against her chest, and the inquiry formally opened, and the county committee 2 weeks away, and Thomas Carter, somewhere across 3 miles of summer fields, preparing whatever came next. She was not done fighting, not even close. But she was fighting on her own terms now, with the truth in her possession, and 2 witnesses prepared to speak, and a judge who had read a ledger entry and understood exactly what it meant. Her father had trusted that no was enough. Eleanor had learned that no was only the beginning. What came after? Know the documentation, the witnesses, the public accounting the refusal to let a powerful man quietly bury what he had done that was the real work. And she intended to finish it. The 2 weeks before the county committee meeting were the longest of Eleanor's life, and she had lived through some long ones. Carter did not stay quiet. She had not expected him to. But the particular shape of what he did surprised her not because it was clever, but because it was personal in a way she had underestimated. He did not attack the documents directly. He attacked her. Word moved through the county the way word always moved in Virginia in the summer, through kitchen conversations and church steps, and the particular social machinery of women who visited each other in the afternoons, and men who stood together outside the courthouse. And the word that moved was this. Eleanor Whitmore had lost her good sense over the return of a man she'd been attached to in her youth. She had made accusations against a respected family out of romantic confusion. She was a young woman without a father with an aunt who had always been known for a certain instability of judgment, and she had allowed her emotions to lead her into a public scene that embarrassed herself and the county both. Eleanor heard this from 3 separate sources within 5 days. She did not argue with any of them. She went home after each conversation and sat at her father's desk and worked through the documentation again. Dates, payment amounts, the sequence of events, the chain of cause and effect that ran from Carter's first letter to her father in 1809 all the way to a ledger entry marked R. Richmond Postal and a box of undelivered letters her aunt had kept in a back room for 2 years. She was not going to win this with emotion. She was going to win it with sequence. On the 8th day before the committee meeting, Nathaniel came to the Whitmore property in the morning, rather than the evening, which meant something had happened. She met him at the front door before he reached it, because she had seen him come up the drive and his pace carried news. "Reed is recanting," he said. Eleanor felt the ground shift. "What?" "He sent word to Myers this morning. He's withdrawing his letter. He says he was coerced into making the original statement. He says Ashford pressured him." Nathaniel's jaw was tight. Carter got to him. Offered him something, money probably. Protection. Reinstatement in the postal system, possibly through whatever connections Carter still has in Richmond. Eleanor stood very still. "Myers," she said. "What does Myers say?" "That a recantation changes the evidentiary picture. That without Reed's direct testimony, we still have the ledger pages," Eleanor said. "We still have Boone. We still have my aunt and William." "We do," Nathaniel said. "But Myers says Carter's attorney will argue that without Reed the ledger notation is ambiguous. Our Richmond postal could be any payment. It's circumstantial." "It's not ambiguous when you read it alongside the dates," Eleanor said sharply. "The dates match the period of the interception precisely. They begin 6 weeks before my father died and end exactly when the engagement was announced. That's not ambiguity, that's a pattern." "I know that," Nathaniel said. "You know that. Myers knows that. The question is whether a county committee looking for reasons to avoid a confrontation with one of their most influential members will choose to know it." Eleanor turned away from him and pressed her hand flat on the doorframe. She stood like that for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "Where is Reed now?" "Richmond," Nathaniel said. "He sent the letter from there." "Can you reach him before the committee meeting?" "Eleanor, I'm not asking you to pressure him," she said. "I'm asking if you can reach him, if I can write to him directly." She turned back around. "He recanted because Carter offered him something. But Carter can take back whatever he offered if Reed becomes inconvenient. Reed knows that. He's been in this man's employ. He knows what Carter does to people who outlive their usefulness." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "What would you say to him?" he said. "The truth," she said. "That the committee hearing will put everything on record regardless. That his recantation is now itself on record and will be examined alongside the original letter. That if Carter's arrangement is exposed, and it will be the question of whether Reed cooperated with the inquiry or was found to have withdrawn under pressure, will matter a great deal to the federal postal authorities when they look at his role in all of this." Nathaniel looked at her. "You're telling him it's safer to tell the truth than to take Carter's money," he said. "I'm telling him it's true," she said. "Because it is." "Send the letter," he said. "I'll make sure it reaches him." She wrote it that afternoon. 3 paragraphs. Clear and direct, without threats and without sentiment, in the tone her father had used when he wanted someone to understand that he meant exactly what he said. She gave it to Nathaniel that evening. Then she went upstairs and read the 31 letters. She had been saving them. Not deliberately avoiding them, or perhaps deliberately in the way you avoid something, not because it frightens you, but because you want to read it when you have the full capacity to receive it. She had been carrying too much urgency in the days since the dinner. She had not wanted to bring that urgency into the letters. She read them now, all 31, in order. From the first written in the early months of his time in Europe, when the letters were careful and formal, and underneath the formality was a man who was very homesick and very determined not to say so directly, to the last written in the final weeks before the clerk stopped them, when the formality had given way entirely to something plainly and directly stated. The letter dated November 1812. The one she had told him to read, the one on the 3rd page, was the letter she had been waiting to find. It was not the most eloquent of the 31. It was not the most careful. It was the one where he had apparently set down whatever guard he had been maintaining and written the thing he actually meant in the words that came without management. "I think about coming home every day. Not to Virginia particularly. To you specifically. I realize this is not the proper thing to put in a letter. I've started this paragraph 4 times and deleted it each time, and I'm writing it now because if I delete it again, I think I'll be deleting it for the rest of my life. What I mean is, you are what home means to me. Whatever I'm building here, whatever I come back with, I'm building it to bring back to you. I don't know what you'll do with that information. I don't know if it's still welcome, but I know that I would rather you have it and do what you will with it than carry it around for years pretending it isn't true. Eleanor sat with that for a long time. Then she set the letter down carefully with the same care she used for all of them, and thought about a man who had written that in 1812 and never known she'd read it, who had waited and gotten silence, who had eventually reluctantly begun to build an acceptance of a loss that had never actually happened. She thought about the particular cruelty of that. Then she got up, put the letters back in order, and went to bed. She needed to sleep. The committee meeting was in 6 days. She could grieve the lost years after the fight was finished. Reed's response came on the 5th day. It came directly to the Whitmore property addressed to Eleanor, which meant he had made some kind of decision about who he was answering to. The letter was short. Shorter than she expected. Miss Whitmore, I received your letter. I want you to know I was not lying when I wrote the first one. I was paid to hold those letters, and I did it. And I have known for some time that it was wrong. I agreed to withdraw my statement because Carter's man came to me with a significant sum and told me the statement couldn't be proven, and that I would be the one who suffered if it went to a federal inquiry. I was afraid. I am still afraid. But you are right that a man who helped do what was done to you and to Ashford ought to at least be willing to say so plainly when it comes to a formal accounting. I will appear before the committee if required. I am not withdrawing my original statement. Eleanor read it 3 times. Then she sent for Nathaniel. He arrived within the hour, read the letter in under a minute, and said, "He'll show up." "He says he will," Eleanor said. "Carter will know," Nathaniel said. "If Reed is coming, Carter will know before he arrives. He'll have someone watching." "Let him watch," Eleanor said, and she heard her own voice say it, and recognized it as something she had said before, at the beginning of this, and felt that she had meant it then, and meant it more now. The morning of the committee meeting arrived gray and close, the kind of July morning that carries its heat early and makes no apologies for it. Eleanor dressed in the same blue dress she had worn to the Carter dinner. Her aunt appeared at her door. "Ready?" Eleanor said. "Yes," Margaret said. She was carrying herself differently than she had at the start of all this. Not the managed composure of before, but something quieter and more earned. The posture of a woman who has admitted to something difficult and is living forward from the admission. They rode together to the courthouse. Nathaniel was waiting outside, and beside him, which Eleanor had not fully allowed herself to expect, stood William Carter. He looked like a man who had not slept in 2 weeks, which was probably accurate, and like a man who had made peace with a decision that was going to cost him a great deal, which Eleanor could see in the particular stillness he was carrying. "You came," she said. "I said I would," he said. "Your father is inside," William said. "He arrived an hour ago. He's been speaking with the committee members individually." A pause. "He's working very hard this morning." "So are we," Eleanor said. William looked at her steadily. "Whatever happens, I want you to know that I'm not here because of the inquiry. I'm not here because Myers asked for my statement." He paused. "I'm here because my father treated you like a parcel of land, and I stood close enough to it to have noticed, and I didn't. That's mine to answer for." Eleanor held his gaze. "William," she said, "what your father did is his. What you do today is yours. Those are different accounts." He nodded. He did not say anything else. But something in him settled some last internal argument, resolving itself on the right side. They walked in together. The county committee room held 12 men, 3 of whom Eleanor recognized as having attended Carter's dinner. She had anticipated this. She had discussed it with Myers, who had told her plainly that he could not guarantee the committee's composition, but that a formal inquiry once opened required a formal finding, and that finding would be on record regardless of what the committee concluded. Carter was already seated at the long table beside his attorney. He looked composed. He looked like a man who had spent the morning shoring up every available support and was confident in the structure he had built. He looked at Eleanor when she entered. She looked back at him. She sat down. Myers called the proceeding to order. What followed was not dramatic in the way that confrontations in stories are sometimes dramatic, with raised voices and sudden revelations and the clean, single moment of collapse. It was something more methodical, and in some ways more merciless than that. It was a formal accounting. Myers presented the documents. Carter's attorney challenged each one. Eleanor answered each challenge with the next document in the sequence because she had organized everything chronologically the way her father had taught her, so that each piece connected to the next, and the shape of the whole was visible. The boundary dispute claim Carter had filed the morning after the dinner, Boone testified that Carter's own survey maps showed no disputed boundary, that the claim had been prepared in advance, that the notation in Carter's office records showed it was part of what Boone's document called contingency actions in the event of resistance. Carter's attorney objected to Boone's credibility. Myers asked Boone how long he had worked for Carter. 4 years, Boone said. Myers asked whether he had kept his own records during that period. Yes, Boone said, he had. Myers asked why. Because Boone said simply and without drama, a man who works for Thomas Carter learns quickly that what Carter says and what Carter's records show are sometimes different things, and a careful man keeps his own. 3 committee members exchanged a look. Carter's attorney moved to challenge the ledger pages. Myers introduced Reed's letter, the original, not the recantation. He noted for the record that a recantation had been submitted and subsequently withdrawn by the witness who had indicated in writing to Miss Whitmore that the recantation was made under pressure. Carter's attorney said that Reed's reversal of his own reversal was evidence of instability. Myers said the committee would make its own determination. Then he asked if Jonas Reed was present. The door at the back of the room opened. Reed was a slight man, younger than Eleanor had imagined, with the look of someone who had been carrying something heavy for too long and had recently set part of it down. He walked to the front of the room without looking at Carter, which Eleanor noticed, and which told her something about the work it had cost him to walk through that door. He stated his name. He confirmed the arrangement. He named the sum, the dates, the routing instructions, the specific instruction to hold letters bearing the Ashford name and not to deliver any correspondence to the Ashford address in Europe after the first 8 months. Carter's attorney said, "You withdrew this statement 4 days ago. Why should this committee?" "Because I told the truth the first time," Reed said. He said it quietly. "And I withdrew it because I was afraid. And I'm saying it again now because a woman who lost 5 years of her life on account of something I helped arrange deserves at least to have it said plainly in a room full of people." He paused. "I'm not a good man. I did a bad thing for money, and I knew it was bad. But I can at least say so when it matters." The room was very quiet. Carter said for the first time since the proceeding began, "This is Mr. Carter," Myers said. "You'll have opportunity to respond when the witness has finished." Carter went silent. It was, Eleanor thought, possibly the most significant silence of the entire proceeding. Not because of what was said in it, because of what it represented Thomas Carter, in a room full of men who had deferred to him for 30 years, being told to wait his turn. He waited. Margaret spoke last before the committee retired to deliberate. She stood up without being asked, simply rose from her chair and addressed the room in the clear, careful voice of a woman who has rehearsed what she intends to say. Not because she wants to perform it, but because she wants to be sure she says it exactly right. She said she had been approached by Thomas Carter 3 years ago. She described the meeting. She described the letters Carter had shown her, the forged letters claiming Nathaniel had settled in Europe with another woman. She described agreeing to discourage Eleanor from further correspondence. She said she had told herself it was protection, and she now understood it was something else. Then she said, "I want this committee to understand one thing clearly. My niece stood in this county and spoke the truth without my support until I found the courage to give it. Whatever mistakes I made, she did not. Eleanor Whitmore has conducted herself throughout this matter with more integrity than any person in this room has the right to demand. Whatever you decide today, I want that on record." The room held still for a moment. Myers wrote something. Then he dismissed the room to deliberate. They waited in the corridor for 40 minutes. Eleanor sat on the bench outside the committee room, with her hands in her lap and her back straight and her face composed. Nathaniel sat beside her close enough that she could feel the steadiness of him, which she found despite everything. Despite 5 years and 31 undelivered letters and a box kept in a back room more useful than almost anything else at that moment. "Whatever they decide," he said quietly. "I know," she said. "Whatever they decide, it's on record." "That's not what I was going to say," he said. She looked at him. "I was going to say that whatever they decide, you did everything right," he said. "From the moment you got my letter. Every single decision. I want you to know I saw it." She looked at him for a long moment. William was standing further down the corridor, his hat in his hands, turning it slowly in the way that Nathaniel used to do when he was thinking carefully. He caught Eleanor's eye and nodded once. She nodded back. Margaret sat on the bench on Eleanor's other side, straight-backed and quiet. Her hands folded her face, carrying the expression of a woman making her peace with something she cannot undo, but can going forward refuse to repeat. The committee room door opened. Myers stepped out. He looked at Eleanor. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "The committee has reached a finding." The finding was not everything. Carter's attorney had argued successfully that several elements required federal review. The postal interference in particular would need to go to a higher authority than a county committee. Myers had expected this. Eleanor had expected this. The federal process would take months, and its outcome was not guaranteed. But the county finding was this: the boundary dispute claim filed by Carter against the Whitmore Eastern acreage was found to be without merit and dismissed with prejudice. The Whitmore property title was confirmed intact. Carter's attempt to cloud the title was entered into the public record as a finding of the committee, and the inquiry into the broader arrangement, the meetings, the payments, the interference with Eleanor's personal circumstances was forwarded to the Federal Postal Authority with the committee's formal endorsement, which meant it was not dismissed. It was not buried. It was sent upward with the committee's weight behind it. Carter sat at the long table when Myers read the finding and said nothing. His attorney said something quiet into his ear, and Carter shook his head once, a small, tight motion, and that was all. He stood when the proceeding ended. He turned toward the door. He passed Eleanor on the way out. He stopped. For a moment he looked at her with the expression of a man deciding whether to say something, and Eleanor held his gaze without expression and waited, and after that moment he decided not to, and he walked out without speaking. Eleanor watched him go. Then she let out a breath she had been holding for 2 weeks. Outside the courthouse in the July heat, William shook Nathaniel's hand. It was a brief, serious exchange, two men acknowledging each other across a situation that required acknowledgement. William said something low that Eleanor didn't catch. Nathaniel nodded. There was no warmth in it and no hostility. Just two people arriving at a correct accounting of who the other was. William turned to Eleanor. "I'm leaving Charlottesville," he said. "Not immediately, but I'm going." He paused. "My father's estate, whatever happens with the federal inquiry, his business interests here are going to contract considerably. There's not much for me in that." He paused again. "I thought I'd go west. There's land available out past the mountains. I've been thinking about it for a while." "William," Eleanor said. "You don't need to say anything," he said. "I know where things stand. I knew before you did, probably." Something quiet crossed his face. "I hope you're happy, Eleanor. I mean that, honestly." "I know you do," she said. "I hope the same for you." He put his hat on. He tipped it once, a clean final gesture, and walked to his horse and rode west in the direction that his own life was apparently waiting for him. Eleanor watched him until he rounded the far corner and was gone. Jackie. The weeks that followed were quieter. Not easy. Nothing about the aftermath of what she had done was easy. The federal inquiry moved slowly and required documentation and correspondence, and the periodic appearance of a very tired Jonas Reed in various official offices. Carter's social influence in the county did not evaporate overnight. Some men continued to defer to him. Some women continued to repeat the story about Eleanor's judgment being compromised by old attachment. But the county committee finding was public. The dismissed boundary claim was public. The letters from Carter to her father were on record. And a community that had spent 30 years accepting Thomas Carter's version of events had now seen in a formal proceeding what was underneath it. It is harder to unsee something than people expect. Margaret stayed at the Whitmore property. This was not a decision that happened all at once. It was something that settled gradually over the course of several weeks as the specific shape of what was between them became clearer. Eleanor did not pretend the forgiveness was complete. Margaret did not ask her to. What they arrived at instead was something more durable than pretended forgiveness, an honest accounting of what had happened, and a mutual willingness to continue in each other's lives on new terms. Margaret began meeting with the county women who had been circulating Carter's narrative, and she told them plainly what she had told the committee. She did this without drama and without self-pity, which Eleanor thought was the most effective possible approach. A woman admitting plainly that she had been wrong without excuse was considerably harder for gossip to get traction against. The narrative began to shift. What? On a Tuesday morning in late August, 6 weeks after the committee meeting, Eleanor rode out to the eastern 40 acres for the first time since all of this had begun. Nathaniel was already there. She had not arranged to meet him. He had simply arrived the way she suspected he had been, in the habit of arriving at places that mattered to him quietly, ahead of the moment ready, but not pressing. He was standing at the river's edge, looking out at the water, when she rode up. She dismounted and walked to stand beside him. They stood there for a moment, without speaking, with the sound of the river and the late summer heat, and the particular quality of light that belongs to mornings in Virginia in August, bright and unhurried, the kind of light that has been there long enough to settle into the landscape. "My father bought this land in 1808, Eleanor said. He walked the boundary line himself. He said the river made a sound in the mornings that he'd never heard anywhere else." "What did it sound like?" Nathaniel said. "He said it sounded like an argument that was going well," she said. Nathaniel looked at her. "I read the November 1812 letter," he said. "You told me to." "I know," she said. "The third page," he said. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. "I meant it when I wrote it," he said. "I mean it more now." Eleanor looked at the river. She thought about 5 years, about 31 letters, about a hat box with 9 responses worn soft at the folds, about a box of her own words kept in a back room, never reaching the person they were meant for, about the particular grief of a silence that was manufactured, about the particular stubbornness required to keep fighting for a truth that everyone else found convenient to bury. She thought about her father, standing at this river, with his hand on the survey map, declining 3 letters over 6 years, trusting that no was enough. She thought about what she now knew no was not enough for. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes," he said, not as a question, as an answer. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her with the expression she had been reading and rereading across 5 years and 11 weeks, and a proceeding that had put everything on record steady and certain, and not performing any of it, not managing it, just meaning it completely. "I want to start," she said. "Whatever this is, I want to start it." "We already started," he said. 5 years ago, we just had an interruption." Something in her chest that had been clenched for longer than she could precisely identify released. "A significant interruption," she said. "The longest one I ever intend to have," he said. She looked at him for a long moment with the river behind them and the eastern 40 acres of her father's land stretching out in every direction around them, untouched and unencumbered and entirely hers. Then she said, "The letter in 1812. The thing I never said to you out loud." "I read it," he said. "Then you know." "Yes," he said. "Then I don't need to say it now," she said. "Because you already know, And there's time. There's all the time we need, he said. She turned back to the river. He stood beside her. The water ran over the stones at the south fork of the Rivanna. The way her father had said, it always ran with a sound that was particular to this place on this land in this light. The boundary dispute was dismissed. The letters were delivered. The truth was on record in every room that mattered. And Eleanor Whitmore stood on her own ground beside a man who had crossed an ocean and waited and come home and told the truth and stayed and understood with the full clarity of a woman who had fought for every inch of it that a life chosen on your own terms, whatever it costs, however long it takes, however many people tell you to accept the quieter version, is the only life worth the trouble of living. She had chosen. And for the first time in 5 years, every part of her meant it.